really good. We'll see how relaxed he is now.
We're actually talking about George. Hello, everybody.
Yeah, hello.
And George is not a bunny. You will see in a minute.
No, this is Emily.
Yes, who is growing
Emily
and seems pretty relaxed to me.
Yeah, she's getting there.
She's getting there, yeah. So we're actually not talking about bunnies for once.
We're not.
No.
She's just here getting her nightly cuddle.
That's right. Which is, we multitask very well, don't we?
We're working on it.
Come on, we do. So tonight we're going to talk about George, and part of talking, excuse me, talking about George is talking about trust in big ways, because George has been an education in trust for 2 years now, 2.5 years?
2.5 years now I've had him.
Yeah.
He's been with me since the 1st of August 2 years ago. So 2.25 years.
Yeah, not bad at all. And hopefully this would show you, this is George. And that is one of my favorite pictures of George. He's really soft and looks absolutely gorgeous. And he's like, does anybody really want me? He's very beautiful. So tell us about George, Fiona.
George is the Suffolk Punch, which is one of Britain's oldest breeds of horses. They've been recorded since the 1500s in East Anglia. Mm-hmm. They are hopping horses, they're cart horses. Mm-hmm. So they can also turn their hoof to anything. And I have seen a Suffolk clear a 5-bar gate.
That's going.
They can pull carts. They are immensely heavy. George is actually going to mature at about a metric ton, which is massive.
Yeah. It is.
Most Suffolks are very, very gentle and placid. And George isn't.
No. Before we actually get to George, there is one other thing which I always find stunning about Suffolks. They're always this colour. They may not have a blaze.
They're chestnut.
They're
all shades of chestnut.
They're goldy.
But they're all chestnut.
And they've got
beautiful.
It's the most beautiful golden hair I've ever seen.
Yes.
I mean,
not all Suffolks are blonde.
It is blonde. Totally.
Yes. George is a blonde Suffolk with a pale mane and tail. They do come dark. You can get liver chestnuts so dark they're almost black, but not quite. And they go all the way through 7 different recognised shades of chestnut.
Cool.
George is in the middle. He's a red chestnut, but it goes liver, dark, dull, red, bright, and mealy, and then light. And George is a red chestnut. Yeah. And they go several shades paler than him.
He's
almost lemon yellow. Yeah. The lemon chestnuts.
Gosh. Yeah.
And you don't very often see the ends of the spectrum.
He does actually have a blonde mane and tail, but you're going to see him in a minute and you won't see it.
He's very filthy at the moment because my horses are not rugged and stabled.
No.
They have free access to their field whenever they want, and if they want to go out and get muddy, then they go out and get muddy. And they also come into the barn whenever they want, and there's always hay. So it's as much autonomy as I can give them without actually opening the gate and letting them walk down the road.
Which is probably not a good idea anyway.
No, it's not. There's too many people in cars.
Yeah. I've got a picture of George as a baby here. Shall we go and see we're going to see if we can find that for everybody, if I can find out where I put anything, because I'm having one of these days today. Right, there we go. Right, this is baby George, which I hope we're going to get to share in a minute, if I can get to doing share. Are we sharing George? We are sharing George. We are sharing George.
I'm still looking forward to George lying down.
Right, okay, so we're not sharing George. Let's try. Are we? No, that's not working. Hang on a minute, people. I'm terribly sorry about this. I am screwing again. Oh, I've got it now. I know what I'm doing now. Is that better?
No, I'm still looking at George lying down.
Right. I'll get the hang of this. Honestly, I really, really, really will. Let's go back again.
If you get rid of the share and then choose the photo and reshare, that might
That's
work.
right. Yeah, I've got it now. Sorry, the brain, I haven't had enough tea today. It's one of those bad days. So we'll go back and share the screen again, and we will get to baby George. Now, are we getting to baby George? Baby George? Yes? Yeah,
That's
we
young
have
George.
baby George. Now,
That's 2-year-old George.
which is still pretty small. He was
Yes.
what, about 14.2 then?
He was 14.2 when he came to me, and that was about 6 months before.
So it's about
So
14
he's
hands.
blonde mane and tail and a lovely red body, and he's quite flaxen around his ankles as well.
Yeah, yeah. Which gives you a good idea of his colour there.
Yes.
And he doesn't look like he's going to be a big horse at all. So you're going to get a shock in a
They
minute.
look like rather cobby ponies at that age.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
Yeah. And George still has 2 or 3 years of weight gain still to go. He's only 4.
Yeah.
So he's getting to the end of adolescence as horses go.
That's right. So let's take us a little bit further. And what have I got to offer now? George lying down, baby George, and I think that's me. So I think that the next one is definitely you. So
Right.
this is George moving around, and George, what, about 2 days ago?
4 years old.
Yeah.
So we'll just go to this one. Just take me a moment. Do that one. We should now see George.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just play. Now, bear in mind that I'm 5'2" and I'm standing on a 6-inch tall podium there.
Right.
And he's still taller than me.
And his shoulder is here. And in a minute, there, you see, it comes up to above Fiona's neck. So he's a big lad, but you don't half get his head.
I'm feeding him carrots, slices of carrot.
Which he thinks he likes slightly better than the grass.
Yes, yes.
There, look at that face.
Now, believe it or not, this is enormous progress from George.
Yeah.
Because he has had enormous trust issues to go with his enormous self. He actually couldn't put his head round in front of someone like that without biting them.
Yeah.
So there we go. So if I just stop this and we go back to just us.
Right. So that was it for George for the moment. We might give you a bit more George to go home on.
There.
Yeah. So George arrived. Well, let's hear George's history, because George's history and how you found him is amazing.
Yes. We've got to go all the way back to 1987.
Right.
In 1987, my parents bought me a Suffolk Punch mare called Berkel's Heritage Gwenny, or Gwenny, as I called her. And she was with me from 18 months until she was 7. And during that time, I rode her, I drove her. She had 2 beautiful foals, one by a thoroughbred stallion and one purebred Suffolk Punch. And then I put her back in foal again, and she miscarried with twins. Now, horses don't do twins very well. It's very, very rare. But she lost her twins, and then she died 3 days later with an infection. So I'd lost her as well. And I had, at that time, just sold her daughter, Rhiannon, a purebred daughter. And I lost track of, I mean, I was so knocked endwise by this. It was quite a long time before I could even bear to look at a horse.
Yeah.
So I lost track of Rhiannon. But sometime later, about 3 years ago, I started looking into it. And I saw a photo on Flickr. And it came up, and I sort of looked at it and thought, that looks familiar. So I got in touch with the owners of the Suffolk and said, is that by any chance a relation of Penbrin and Rhiannon? I said, yes, this is Ridgway Alice, and she's Penbrin and Rhiannon's daughter. I said, wow, because I bred Rhiannon. So we had quite a long chat, and it turns out that Alice had 2 foals, a daughter called Florence, and a son called Hector. And then sometime later, I came across a photo of a horse looking over a gate. That was George, beginning of this year. And I sort of looked at him and thought, oh, it does look a little familiar. So I got in touch with them and said, hey, your horse, is he related to Ridgway Alice? I said, yes, he's Ridgway Florence's son. So this is Rhiannon's great grandson.
And Gwenny's great grandson.
Yes, I lose track of how many greats there are in the middle, but
I
certainly.
run out, but yes. Yeah.
So at the time, he was the only foal from Florence. She has since had another foal, a filly called James. So George does have a half sister. But there he is. So he was for sale, and I had a little money, and I said, "Can I buy him?" And they said, "Sorry, we sold him just now to somebody else." And I was like, right, okay. So then I bought Abe, because at the time I sort of thought, well, I was going to buy a horse, and I couldn't buy that horse, but actually I do like having a horse around, and I can afford it at the moment. So I bought Abe. And I don't regret buying Abe for 1 minute, because he's a delightful, sneaky little demon and so educational. But then 6 months later, the breeder phoned me up out of nowhere and said, if you're still interested in George, the people we sold him to have come back to us and said they can't handle him. So I sort of went, right, and got in touch with them. And fair enough, they couldn't handle him. He was completely out of control. But Suffolk punches, all the heavy horses are difficult because of their size. You do have to be respectful of their sheer size. And all young horses tend to be clumsy. And Georgie had quite a traumatic break when he left his breeders. He left his mum, the only home he'd ever known, the only humans he'd ever known, and he was moved 3 hours north to Harrogate and plunked into the middle of a busy livery stable, surrounded by strange horses, strange people, strange surroundings, strange routines. He was used to living in a field, and he was locked in a stable. And then we got the beast from the east, that 2 weeks of snow that held everything up 2 years ago. So there was George in solitary confinement 24/7, and he went stir crazy. Climbed out over his door and went exploring in the night and trashed everything. So you can imagine half a ton of horse trampling over stuff, breaks it. And it all went downhill from there. So they'd had him 6 months and they couldn't handle him. He was climbing over gates and doors and biting everyone he could find. And I went down to see him. He was out in a field, and he came over when he was called, and he looked cheerful. And they tied him up for me, and I went and talked to him. And no, you didn't want to take your hand further back than his shoulders, because he would try and bite and kick. But I could see he was responding to me when I talked to him. He was very defensive. He was scared. So I said I'd take him. And I had him brought up to Scotland. We started out at first in a livery stable, because that's where I kept Abe. It wasn't entirely successful. They did their best. There were only 3 people there who'd handle him. And he had a habit of leaning over his door and biting anyone who walked past.
But he did make friends with Abe.
He made friends with Abe, who was in the stable next door.
Which was excellent. Yes.
And it gave us a chance to get to know each other. And then I bought this place and brought everyone here. I do joke about this, because actually, because I got George, I also got Dancer and Poppy. Because I wanted George to have a proper social system for him to fit into. And really, horses live in a mixed gender, mixed age herd. This is the natural state for horses. Anything else, and you start getting mental stress. Most horses can cope, but for George's sake, I wanted to try and make it better. And then I bought this place. So I joke that I've spent nearly 200 grand on George. None of which I regret.
No.
Anyway, he's come here. He's trashed the place here as well. He's knocked down the stable walls, because they were only made of wood.
That was quite good. I saw the results of some of that.
Yeah, he will actually knock bricks out of the wall when it
literally. and great bars down, great oak bars down and everything.
Yeah. But he's got the hang of it, and he knows his way around, and he's got used to being in the herd with Poppy and Dancer and George. And Abe, rather. and he knows me.
Yeah.
And, you know, for very, very slowly and carefully, I've been working with him. We work either side of a fence so that he can't bite me.
Mm.
And we've worked on his trust issues with food.
Mm.
He's got used to the fact that nobody is ever going to hit him here.
Mm.
I may shout at him when he bites me, but that's the worst of it. And to be honest, if you've never been bitten by a horse, don't start because it hurts.
Absolutely, yes.
They actually have more bite force than a lion.
Mm. Mm.
They put about 2,000 psi on each tooth, and once they really decide to go for you, and it's a crush injury. It's not a bite like a cat or a dog. It doesn't make holes.
No,
it just crushes you.
They've got grazy teeth.
Yes,
You know,
they have flat teeth.
They don't have fangs and things.
So when he goes for you, it's more like being squashed between two bricks applied at high force.
Mm. Mm.
So, you know, when he bites, it's 10 days before the bruises fade. So in the course of him getting over his trust issues, I've developed some trust issues, as you can imagine.
Yes.
I know if I try and pick up his feet, he'll kick me. Or he'll turn around and bite me, which is how he got me last time. Mm. And the thing about doing horse's feet is to lift a horse's hoof, you've got to turn your back on his teeth.
Yes. Yeah.
This is not conducive to relaxation around George. So what we're doing now that he's got over his trust issues is I'm trying to work on mine. I'm just getting used to standing close to him because that's quite a relatively new thing for us to do. But he now likes having his head close to me, and he likes to rub his ears on me. And he'll put his head down and lean his nose on my shoes while I'm scratching his ears. Given George's size, when he does that and his nose is on my foot, his ears are actually at my waist height.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Which is quite something, that. Yeah.
It is. He's a very big horse.
Well, we could see it, or I could get the idea of it in the video. And yes, he's closer there than I think I've ever seen him with you. I haven't seen him for over a year. This is true, not in flesh. But he was closer there than I've ever seen him with you.
Yes.
Which is quite something. And the other thing is, somebody's going to say, well, why don't you tie him up then when you do your feet?
Yes, yeah, we have done that.
Yes.
But if you tie him up so he can't bite you, he just kicks you instead.
Yes. And in a state of complete horror, he will then rip his head out of his head collar. And if it isn't very, very solid, he'll have whatever he's tied up to down.
Yeah, and since the main ring I tie him to isn't a brick wall, I'd rather he didn't pull the brick wall down.
No, but we have seen him with bricks before, so it's not a good idea.
Yeah, yeah. And besides, the point is not to force him to do what he doesn't want to do.
No.
The point is I would like him to trust me enough to let me do what needs doing without stressing about it.
Yeah, yeah.
And you know, in the last 8-10 weeks, I'm beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I think we might get there. I should say he does have his feet looked at by a professional every 6 weeks, because the hoof trimmer comes and looks at all my horses every 6 weeks and trims the other 3. And she looks at George and says, actually, he's not bad. He's okay. I can live with that. He does what's called self-trimming. Because if you think about it, in the wild,
they never get
nobody goes out and trims a Brumby's feet.
No, no.
Nobody's out there catching mustangs and rasping their feet down and putting shoes on.
And before there were humans, there were horses. You know, I mean, how did they manage before we were around to trim hooves? You know,
well, they walk at over 100 miles a day.
Yeah.
Now, a wild horse herd can cover between 25 and 100 miles a day. We've shut them in a stable so they can't move.
Which is pretty foul, really, when you think about it.
It is really, and that's why they can't wear their hooves down. And that's why I let mine go in and out all the time. It's inconvenient for me, but they like it, and it's better for them.
And it's not really the end of the world, even for you. You know,
no, it's not.
They're there, and they've got their runs of where they go, and gradually that'll probably turn into, like, say, 3 runs or 2 runs in a field or pastures or whatever kind of thing, so that they've got their space. But
they've got their space. That was the whole point here, was to set it up as close to natural for the horses as possible.
Yeah.
what's called an equicentral system.
Yeah. Yeah.
It does mean the ducks and geese have to duck for cover sometimes.
But they would normally anyway, and they're quite used to it.
Yes.
And everybody lives together. So
Yes.
it's not unreal. You know, there's not a
No,
duck space,
it's as
hen
close as I
space,
can
horse
manage.
space. Yeah.
It's as close as I can manage to what the horse has evolved to live.
Yeah.
And I think that has helped George with his mental health problems.
I would say
This is a horse with PTSD.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when I was, it must be 18 months since I've been up there now, isn't it? Because it wasn't May this year, it was May the previous year.
Yes.
And they, they were going out and that sort of thing. And there was still this like, nobody's going to catch us and force us to spend the night indoors. You could see it in their faces, all of them. It was like, we can come and go. And they still weren't used to it, but especially Poppy, who's the oldest. Yeah. And
yes.
so
she's also the one who's had the most intensive handling.
Yeah.
Because she's accustomed to being shut in a stable as a broodmare.
Mm. Yeah.
In fact, Poppy came to me. She's always been well looked after. She's never been badly handled. She's always been cared for, and everything has been done for her.
Yeah.
But she's never had the opportunity to make choices.
No.
And when you get into a state where you have no choice, you develop what's called learned helplessness.
Yeah. Yeah.
You see it in people just as much as you do in animals.
Yeah, you do.
You don't know how to make a choice. In fact, you can't even see there is a choice because you've never been offered a choice. So you do what you're told.
And you live totally. Go on, sorry.
You see it in people's eyes sometimes. It's a condition called shut down.
Yeah. Yeah.
If people are mentally shut down.
Yeah.
You can see this dead eye. There's no spark there. And you see it in horses a lot.
Yeah.
Particularly horses who are always stabled, rugged, clipped, shod, taken out for exercise, and then put back in their stable again. They're perfectly healthy, physically, but mentally, they're struggling. And
they've got hardly any stimulation, and they don't really see their person very much. And an awful lot of livery horses, their human doesn't necessarily groom them or muck them out. So they don't even get that.
Yeah, and also it's very bad for them digestively.
Oh God, yes.
Like any other grazing animal, horses are designed to eat very low quality food constantly.
Yeah.
So we give them a beautiful fertilized field, and then they get fat because we're not riding them very much.
And then they get all sorts of horrible.
And then we ration their food.
Yeah.
So they come in and they're shut into a stable with a hay net, and the hay net runs out 2 hours later. But they don't get fed again for 10 hours. By the time breakfast comes around, they've got stomach ulcers.
Yeah.
And that's why mine always have the grass and the hay, and they can come and go as they want. And yes, it means I have to slog down the end of the field sometimes to see what's going on. Or I'm halfway through mucking out and the horses all turn up. Like the boys want to sit in the wheelbarrow or something.
Yeah. But
we work it out, and they're all happy and healthy, and that's the main thing.
They are indeed.
You see in their eyes, when you look in their eyes, they're there. They're alive.
And one of the biggest ones for me, I mean, I've just mentioned it when I saw George and, saw his face again in this latest little video. But the other one who's really done my head in with it is poor Poppy, because apart from anything else, she was never allowed to keep a foal beyond 6 months.
No.
So she'd have a baby, come to love it, and it was nowhere near the time when the foal would naturally leave, and it was taken away. And then
it gives you some idea. Dancer is still suckling now, and she's 2 1/4.
Yeah.
And in the wild, it's not unknown for a mare to be suckling last year's foal and this year's foal.
Yeah. And they've actually got enough teeth.
So won't be far off either.
Yeah. And she's getting all that colostrum and everything else that she should be getting. And Poppy, I mean, she couldn't believe it. I mean, you could tell that she knew when her time was up, when she was expecting to lose Dancer, and she didn't. And every
Well,
day was like,
when I brought them here, as soon as I put her in the box, you could see her thinking, oh no, this is when I lose my baby.
yep.
And then we spent 3 hours trying to get baby in the box behind her, which is sort of like, I get to keep her. Right.
Well, I get to keep her today, wasn't it?
Yes.
And then it was like,
we still have a few issues between Poppy and Dancer on what's called separation anxiety. I can't see my baby, where is she? And they start yelling for each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's always a case of, she's right here. Look, here she is. And I will, if I've got Poppy out of the barn and Dancer's calling, I'll walk Poppy to where Dancer can see her. And then everything is sweetness and light. And of course, the other way around.
Yeah. Yeah.
They do it sometimes when Poppy's come in with George and Dancer and Abe out in the field, and they'll suddenly go, hang on a minute, I'm losing it, I've lost somebody.
Yeah.
And they'll shout.
Yeah.
And we'll hear them whinnying back and forth. Oh, that's where she is. That's okay then. But they have enormously long social memories as well. Horses don't forget. If you separate a mare and foal and then put them back together in 8 to 10 years, they will remember each other.
They know each other. It's like, oh, it's you, you know. I mean, if horses could cry, they would. You can see it in their faces.
Yes.
So
that's why I want a stable herd. I've promised these 4 they'll be together as long as we all live. Yeah.
And that was one of my other things that is sort of, I mean, I love Poppy anyway, because she's so beautiful. But it was just like her pleasure, and the fact that it was the dead eye you were saying, you know, and you could see it in the early photographs of her. And then she started to come alive. You know, this is how it should be to be a horse. And I mean, you talk to her and it was like, somebody's talking to me, because everybody would talk to her foal and take it like she didn't exist.
Yes. And she still sometimes will do that. Oh, you mean me? Yeah. Oh, it's you. Yes, of course you're talking to me. Yeah. And then she'll usually come back with, why are you talking to me? What have you done now?
Yeah. I mean, when you start to realise all this stuff, and that we think we're doing a good job, and we're actually totally fucking up, it's quite heartbreaking.
Yes.
Most of the people who are involved in doing all this kind of thing, they'd be absolutely horrified if they could realise how much they're hurting their horses.
Most people who keep horses are keeping them with absolutely the best of intentions.
Absolutely. But then the road to hell, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Absolutely. But it takes a long time to re-educate people.
Yeah.
None of my horses wear shoes.
No.
Horses didn't evolve to have lumps of metal nailed on their feet.
And you know, the burning and the nails and the all this kind of thing. It's like, you know.
It's actually very bad for them altogether, because the horse's hoof is beautifully evolved over millions of years to help pump blood back up their legs.
Yeah.
And there's a squishy bit in the middle called the frog. And every time the horse's weight comes down, it pumps blood back up the leg. But it can't do it unless it touches the ground.
And with a shoe on, it doesn't. It can't.
It can't touch the ground with a shoe on.
Yeah.
And also the horn that makes the hoof is flexible. It gives.
Yeah.
If you nail a shoe on there, it can't. So then you get concussion damage up the joints.
Yeah.
So fortunately, we are now beginning to learn, and there are quite a lot of barefoot trimmers now. You will come around and trim your horse with a rasp, because horses' feet are like toenails; they keep growing. You need to wear them down. So you either got to get your horse walking a lot, and most people can't. Mine get a little trim because they're mostly on soil, not concrete and road.
Yeah.
In the wild, horses live a lot on rough, stony ground.
Yeah.
And that wears them down. So I do my best that way. And I try and spread the word to other people. You don't need to put shoes on a horse's hooves.
No.
It's actually better if you don't.
Yeah.
In the same way, I don't use metal bits on the horses.
Nope.
Now, when I first got Abe, he came bitted. He was accustomed to wearing a bridle with a bit. And I started training him a little, what's called long reining, which is getting the horse to walk in front on long reins. So you walk behind the horse. Mm. It's like riding, except you're walking behind them, the horse's point of view. And whenever I asked him to stop, he would throw his head up in the air and toss his head around and open his mouth. Yeah. And he was doing that because he didn't like the feel of the bit. Really? It's a piece of metal in his mouth. I mean, you think about it, I wouldn't want a piece of metal in my mouth either.
And it's there's a gap between the front set of teeth and the back set of teeth, and that's where you put it. So when you pull on this quite thick piece of metal, I mean, it can be like that.
Yes.
And it is actually better thicker than thinner if you're absolutely bloody well do it. But you yank on this piece of metal on somebody's jaw, on their actual jawbone. I mean, people, nasty people, and I mean, it happens with their horrible American long bits. People have broken their horse's jaw with the bit by yanking on the reins.
A lot of horses have scars on their tongues where their tongues have been cut.
Yes. Yeah.
There are some horrific injuries that you can do with a bit if you're not careful. Even if you're very gentle and very careful, it's still a lump of metal in their mouth. So I took it out.
Unfortunately, nowadays, there's a lot of bitless and saddle pads instead of the old-fashioned saddles that you can get now. When I started riding back in, crikey, let's think, 1958, with my first pony, and my first pony came bitted with bridle and saddle. And it took me a while to get out of the saddle because there wasn't anything very much you could actually sit on. And my first pony had a back like a whippet. So he was sitting on a razor blade. And so like, I think I want a cushion. But I did get her out of a bit straight away because people were starting to use bitless bridles in this country. They've used them abroad a bit longer, particularly in South America that I know of. And so you get a thing almost like a head collar, only a bit sort of neater than the leather head collars and not all flashy like they are now. And you attach the reins sort of about, this is noseband goes round sort of thing, and you attach the reins on two pieces of metal there. But you can also do it if you put a pieces of metal in and they come down slightly down the side, which was what people used to do a lot back in those days. And so my pony had what looked like, until you got close, either a pelham or half a curb bridle. And so at first, pony club people were all sort of, oh, you're using a pelham, are you? Because it looks a bit more like a pelham because it got these rings here and then the rein rings down here. And then they discovered that I wasn't.
Yes.
And, I was what, 10, 11, 12? So I was told off like mad, you get her out in the fields and she'll take off and she'll run away with you and you'll fall off and you'll break your neck and your dad will be all upset and blah, 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 blah. I never was. I did fall off her, but not because she ran away from me.
Anytime you climb on a horse, you have to accept that sooner or later you will have a gravity-assisted dismount.
Yes.
Also known as falling off. Yes.
One of the worst ones I came off of was when she cornered and I didn't.
Yes.
She was going down like that and I went straight on.
Known as out the side door, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. But I tell you another thing with that is when you...
Probably about 15 years after that, that Barbara Woodhouse, for a dare, played polo on reins made of a single strand of cotton.
Yes, she did. Yeah, it was. Because it was Barbara Woodhouse who got me going, because my dad found one of her very early books about her time in the Argentine, where they do use quite a long curb thing, but it's on a noseband, it's on a bitless bridle, on a halter, and they neck rein, which of course ruins you for the pony club, because you're supposed to be sitting there like this, with your hands like this. And I was sitting there like this. Just doing this. And my horse was doing everything absolutely fine because she liked that. And of course, there's no pull on the jaw. if you really have a go, you can pull on the noseband, but it's not as bad as pulling on the jaw. And what's the point anyway? If she's going to go, she's going to go.
Yes.
And if she's not going to go, it means you two've got the trust. So we're back to the trust thing again.
Well, there is now an increasing movement for riding without any tack at all.
Absolutely.
No saddle and no bridle. And you'll just find people riding with just a loop of rope around the horse's neck.
And sometimes not even that.
Sometimes not even that. No. But it gives you something to hold on to.
Yeah, it's mostly for you. Yeah.
It's a good starting place if you want to ride with no saddle or bridle.
Yeah, yeah.
Emily, dear, don't go that way. The dogs, you know.
And it's nowadays, because you've got they put decent, you can get decent pads that you can sit on. Mm-hmm. And you can even put stirrups on.
That's what I use. That's what I use for mine.
Yeah.
I have. I'll see if I can find it and come back to you.
Yeah, yeah. You can even put stirrups on it. I mean, I used to be able to vault on, but Fiona doesn't do vaulting on, so you know, and I didn't all the time.
Well,
so
I'm not that athletic. I've never done leaping onto horses, and it's actually not very good for your horse's back unless you can do it really well.
Yes.
So I don't.
Yeah, you've got to be able to do it well, otherwise you can actually sort of do a lot of nasties.
Yes.
Yeah. No, and it's so lovely. I mean, I was having a sort of day off on Monday, so I had one of my days off. Let's go and look for lovely horse pics. Partly because I'd started off, somebody was talking to me about dressage, and so I went looking for dressage pics. And if you've ever ridden sort of like Fiona and I have, and you look at modern dressage, you go, no. Because it's so cruel. And the way they ride, the exercises and things like that aren't cruel. It's the way they ride and do them that is bad. So I thought I need something completely different. So on either Wise Woman or Deer Trods, probably both, I've got a couple of films of people riding with no tack. One of them's this New Zealand woman who, she's going over this bloody 6-foot bar fence like in the Horse of the Year show thing. And she hasn't got anything on. There you are, that's the pad.
This is a pad. This is the pad that I use for mine.
Yeah.
It's also a bitless bridle he's wearing, and as you can see, the reins are not precisely tight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is just it's just thick sheepskin with a little bit of padding, front and back to hold me in place.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it's just thick, fleecy sheepskin, and he really likes it. Mm. So you can see by the way he's holding his tail and his head and his ears there. Look at that lovely curve on his neck.
This, by the way, is Abe.
This is Abe. Yes.
Yeah.
He's 2 years older than Georgie.
Yeah.
And he's just waiting for me to get on. And in fact, he enjoys being ridden when we do ride.
Yeah.
To the point where he will actually come and stand next to the mounting block and look at me and say, "Well, aren't you getting on yet?" The last time we went for a ride, I hopped on thinking I'll just take him around the yard a few times.
No.
And he took me to the road gate and said, "We're going out. We're going for a ride on the road." So we did.
Yeah, yeah. And that was really interesting. He'd never been out of the gate before with you on board, had he?
Opening the gate from horseback is quite a tricky art. Yeah, and since I haven't done it for several years, and he's never done it at all. It took us about 10 minutes to get out, and another 10 minutes to get back in. But he learned. He's mastering it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'd rather he was enjoying himself like that than anything.
He really does enjoy himself. I'm just hoping that the weather's going to get a little better, you know, at the end of the month in December. It says it is, so that you can actually get out with him.
Yes.
Because
it's getting pretty dark up here. Even you know, by 3:30, I'm losing the light up here now.
Yeah. But I mean, you might go out in the mornings.
So getting a day when he's clean and dry.
Yeah.
Because you can't put a saddle on a wet horse.
No.
Or a dirty horse. They're getting a bit thin and a bit few on the ground now. But that's okay. I don't keep the horses so I can ride them.
No. I was just thinking more of, Abe saying, "Oh, it's my go, I'm getting a ride."
He was quite cross today when George came out for a play and he didn't.
Yeah.
But they all got carrots.
So with a bit of luck, you might get another sort of good bit tomorrow and be able to, bring him out, because Dancer was a bit miffed too, because she didn't get out.
Dancer was very miffed, yes. She'd actually got her head collar on and was coming out, and George barged through between us, took the rope out of my hand with his just across his chest, and just sort of positioned himself at the gate and went, "No one's going till I'm going." So I went back and got his head collar and he doesn't go.
Oh dear, yeah. So, but it's all of this is about trust, and it's about
trust, and it's about the relationship between me and the horse.
Yeah.
And the horses with each other.
Yeah.
And that's the important thing.
It is, and the horse's agenda comes first as well, which is as far as it possibly can. And if you're falling asleep on your feet, it's "Excuse me, I have to sleep,"
yes.
kind of feeling.
Oh, they've had me out there at midnight before, now mucking out.
Absolutely. But you don't make them do things because you want it.
At the end of the day, it doesn't matter to me if I ride the horses or if I just stand and look at them.
No. As long as they're happy.
As long as they're happy. And they are happy. And they enjoy doing things with me.
Yes, they do.
And that is a massive thrill. When you have a horse like George, who has no reason whatsoever to trust humans. And he says, "Oh, no, you're my human. I want to play with you." That's huge. That's a huge thrill and a great joy and privilege in the truest sense of the word.
And it's to do it, you've got to be with the horse. And we're back to this thing again. For years we've called it sit with, and it has finally borne in upon us that our students thought they all had to sit down. And we sort of thought, well, it's a reasonable assumption to make from what we'd said, but actually we didn't mean that. And so for once we didn't mean what we said. We're usually quite good at it. And so we were sort of struggling around, and we decided, I'm gradually changing it all through the Deer Trogs tribe, that where we say sit with, we mean be with. So you can be with standing and sitting and lying and walking and whatever, as long as you're being with. But being with is, and there's a bit about it in the being present that's up there, but we'll be doing more being present stuff there. And you really must be with. And sometimes the best thing is just to be beside with, because I've seen pics of you with Dancer and George and Abe and Poppy, and they're just standing together with their heads together. And there's nothing like in anybody's mind, the horses or Fiona's. They're just being there and in each other's aura, in each other's field, and feeding each other's field. And that's what you do, is you feed each other's field. And it's all like peaceful and calm and lovely, and you just go, oh. And
what horses do when they're happy and they form a proper herd, and not just a group of horses together who don't really know each other. Mine live with each other 24/7. And they are a herd. And it's a very synergistic thing. It's more than just 4 horses. They have their structure. They know who goes where. They know who they can push out of a bucket and who pushes them out of a bucket.
And who's on guard and who leads and who checks the back end.
Yes, and they always go into the field in the same order and come back in the same field in the same order. This is Poppy's corner where she and Dancer like to stand, and that's George's corner where George and Abe like to stand, and things like that. But energetically, they do form a single entity. And it's always an enormous privilege to me when I go out and they'll let me join them when they're sunbathing in the yard. And I can join the herd, and they will accept me into their joint aura. And that is fantastic.
Isn't it?
A place with immense serenity.
That's the word I was looking for. You are serene together.
Yes.
And some people use the word peaceful, and that's fine, and it is peaceful.
It's peaceful.
But serenity is like even more for me. And I do it with Kellen. She's the only animal I've got. You were doing it just now with I was going to with Emily.
She's digging into shape with her feet.
Then you are really winning if you're being dug into shape. Yeah. And see her eyes, they're open. So she's not in the sort of like, oh, I'm really off stage. But she's there. I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing. You know, when your cat pedals, it's the nearest thing, isn't it?
They do bunny pedals. They do cushions.
They do. It's not well, they're not the same shape, but it's the same sort of idea that you're being molded.
Yes. This is where I want to be comfortable, so I shall make it the shape I want it. And that's how they do it.
And there's such a pleasure in it. I mean, you can see it in her, and you can see it in your cat when your cat's pedaling. And there's a sort of, oh, yeah, this is working. Oh, this is good. Oh, you know, like if somebody scratches the base of your tail or something.
Yes.
Particularly if you're a cat. Mind your face of my tail scratch too. So, but we're not going there. But it's the serenity.
Yes.
And there's nothing much. I mean, maybe old thoughts flickering across your mind, but not much.
No.
Just like, oh.
It is an immensely healing experience as well.
Yeah.
It is. I've got a dog pushing in on this side now. I'll just move the mug safely to the other side. It's incredibly healing to be allowed to join the herd like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had one day when I was feeling incredibly fraught, where just before my mother went off to the nursing home, I was working 22 hours a day looking after my mother and trying to do all the animals and keep them all fit and healthy. And I just went out to the barn and leaned on the gate. And Dancer came ambling over. And she just leaned the end of her nose on my shoulder. And I leaned my cheek on her head. And we stood there for about a quarter of an hour, falling asleep on each other. It was exactly the hug I needed just then.
Yeah. And it's that beingness.
Yes.
And you can use it, and we do use it in a very active way as well. Yes. But it's also really good for you to be. And you can, I mean, people do it against a tree. I do it against a tree. You know,
hugging trees is excellent.
Zonk, you know, I tend to zonk with my forehead on the tree. Or even just straight into the grass and the earth, and you're just overwhelmed by this earthness that happens to you. And it's so serene, but it's getting that place again. And to go right back up to the beginning, after all the biting, and I've seen the bruises, and I've had to send healing and all that kind of thing and help with it, because my God, you know, she's been a mess. But after all that, it's for you to be able to get the confidence to go back to that and be able to have that with George, because you will.
Well, that's what I'm working on now with him.
Yeah.
I'm feeding him carrots while I persuade myself to trust that he will not bite me.
And George is saying, well, these carrots are all very well, but I know it's really her who needs the carrots in a sense. Yeah. But I can't feed her carrots, so.
He's giving me hugs instead, and that's great.
Which is what you want. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it is beyond any descriptions. You know, there are no words for how amazing it is to see him come back to his true nature.
Yeah. Yeah. And serenity in that sense with animals, they are that naturally. If you are just with a wild animal that hasn't been particularly worried by humans or scared. I was thinking of the deer and the pine marten up at Ardnamurchan.
Yes.
Where nobody fusses them very much at all. And they're alert when they come for a feed, but they're not frightened. And I think the only time we saw one run was when it was a bounce play run.
Yes.
And that was a young hind, wasn't it?
Yes.
But otherwise,
they will undoubtedly have moments of drama in their lives as they're chasing rabbits or each other, or dodging cars or whatever. But they're not afraid.
No. And they hadn't discovered those animals because the people around there all love them. Those animals haven't discovered that humans are nasty.
Yes.
And so they treated us the same way, and it was lovely. And I've seen it around here because there's a few badgers and foxes, and at the moment, please the gods, they're not getting very much in the way of hassle. And we've got several badger sets on the land around. And I'm not going out at the moment because it's howling bloody gale out there. And I don't suppose the badgers are doing that much either. But in the summer, you can go out in the twilight and you just sit near them and they come out. And of course, if it's the right time of year, the little ones come out as well. And they're not fazed by me. They know I'm there and I'm sitting very still. That's the other thing. We probably ought to do something about it on the tribe sometime. You need to learn to sit still.
Yes.
And breathing's really good to help that. Breathing. If you use the earth, sun, and breathing exercises, so it's sort of like in 2, 3, 4, out 2, 3, 4 sort of thing. That was wrong. So you're getting in 2, 3, 4, out 2, 3, 4, and doing that. And if you just focus on that and any sort of wind sound or something, you'll go off. You're giggling. Why are you giggling?
She's digging me again.
Oh dear. Just as long. I was wondering what I was saying that was making me giggle. No, but seriously. Just we'll do some little podcasty things that will take you through breathing for say about 10 minutes. You don't need any more. And once you get the hang of it, then go and do it under a tree or at the bottom of the garden or even in a park. Or
this actually has some knock-on benefits as well.
Yeah, it does.
Because if you learn to breathe properly, you will actually improve your health enormously.
Well, you will.
So many of us don't breathe well. So to breathe from the belly properly and to breathe slowly through your nose properly is actually incredibly helpful for you.
Yeah.
There you go. She's going to be a parrot in her next life.
Your neck going to be dug now. Let's face it, you're going to be a different shape. But yeah, it's important.
It has another knock-on benefit, which is that if you learn to do this and you learn to sit still, you learn to be comfortable in yourself.
Yes.
And so many people aren't.
No.
And when you are comfortable in yourself, it shows to everyone around you, and they will go, wow, this is somebody who is self-confident. This is somebody who knows what they're doing. And you go into a job interview and you sit quietly. And your interviewers will be impressed because people can't. Because it's great.
I mean, you think about it when you actually are with somebody who can just sit still and they don't fidget and they don't need to keep looking at their phone or a magazine or wondering what the time is or something like that. They just sit.
If you can just sit in silence. Just not to talk to somebody and be with them. Sometimes it's very useful. It gives them space.
It is one of the things we practice when we've been going on holiday in previous years, isn't it? We do talk to each other, yes.
Yes, but we can also be silent with each other.
Like for 2 or 3 hours.
Yes.
And we're perfectly happy. And then somebody will decide they want a cup of tea. So they actually sort of say, tea? And the other one goes, yeah. But, total conversation, done. But yes, so we'll get some stuff up like that and go through it because it's really important. Somebody was talking to me the other day, in fact this morning, Fiona, about did I give the students a daily practice? And of course I realised we haven't done that on the tribe.
We haven't. We could.
We could. Ever so simple, you know, Earth, Sun, and get into your spiritual place for 10 minutes. Just be with your spiritual place for 10 minutes every day.
Yes.
And it's as simple as that, because it's just those moments that are really you time.
Yes.
Then you can be. I'm perfectly happy.
Yes. It's something we don't get enough of in daily life.
Yeah.
Just touch the spiritual once a day.
Yeah.
At least.
And the other knock-on effects of it all is that if you're into going out and looking at wildlife, you will be able to sit still for an hour or two, which will give all the animals time to have really clocked you, because they can see you even if you can't see them, including all the birds, and they'll decide, this one's all right, we'll come out. Because they're not going to do it in 5 minutes. You're going to have to sit still.
Yes.
You really, really are. And so getting into the practice means you actually get to see it. And surprisingly, some of you gardeners may already know this, to actually just go out and sit and be with your garden.
Oh, yes.
Really helps your garden, because all your plants get into you and they get to know what you're feeling and you get to know what they're feeling. And you just sit, like with the horses, you sit in this aura of plant.
And also you can sit there and think, well, do I actually want to put my potatoes there next year? And the garden will go, no.
Yeah.
Actually, you don't. You want to put them over there.
Yeah. And that's where you're taking the beings thing further, because once you've got used to being with each other and enjoying each other's aura, which is lovely, and you need to do that as well, it's not instead, then you start actually having this conversation.
Yes.
And that's really important. So yeah, we'll work up to all this sort of thing. Fiona's horribly busy at the moment, so don't expect anything. But I've got a couple of things up my sleeve which are going to come out by the end of the week. So we'll have to see how it goes. But the whole trust thing, that's where we're going, and it seems like that's where we're going over the next few weeks, doesn't it?
Yes.
Because it really did start with Bunkin too.
It did. Yes.
Thank you, Bunkin.
It's a very short life, but an incredible catalyst for a lot of things.
And he's brought Conyon back.
Yes.
On that note,
before Emily digs my throat out.
Absolutely, we will stop. So we will see you again.
It's come on so much since she came.
She has indeed. So see you next week, guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.